Hello, everybody. This is Holy Foley, and I am Dr. Vanessa Theme Ament. My guest today is Ruth Sullivan, a Foley artist from London who has worked on various television shows and films, including Killing Eve, Downton Abbey, Truth Seekers Mamma Mia, and Sweeney Todd. Ruth also performs Foley for theater and opera. And this is exciting for me. It's more unusual, which I think is a really exciting application of the craft. And we're going to be discussing that today. So welcome, Ruth. It's such a delight to speak with you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm thrilled. I want everybody to know to write off, because I read The New Yorker, that Ruth has the unique honor of having a cartoon of her performing in The New Yorker. So I'm excited about that, because I think that's actually quite elegant, exciting, and I'm thrilled about that. So anyway, I'm very excited to meet you. I want to start right away. You and I share the honor of having studied theater, and I come originally from theater, nightclub singing as well, but my first degree is in theater, and I've stayed in theater on and off for years and years. So I'd like to start with how you studied theater and then your entry into Foley, and then we'll get into your various applications of the craft, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. So I actually went to a school, a vocational school, from the age of 8. So I was doing dance, drama and music classes for half the day, every day, and for about 9 years. And I started to specialize in theatre from about the age of 14 or 15. One of my main drama teachers had studied at the Jacques Lecoq School in Paris. And it's only in the last few years that I've recognized how important that base of training was and how it's informed all of the work that I do, including directing and movement directing. So, and of course, Simon McBurney, who directs the opera that I work on regularly, was also a student of Jacques Lecoq. So things seem to have come a very useful full circle. After school, I did a theatre arts degree, and then I moved to London. And yes, I was kind of, I wanted to be a famous actress. This wasn't to be, but I was writing CVs and sending them off to all sorts of theatre jobs here, there, and everywhere. I wasn't having much success. I didn't get many auditions. And then I sent off a CV to a little advert that said dancers wanted for film work. And this advert actually was set by a woman who ran a small agency training Foley artists. And that's how I got into Foley. So it really was.
There's an agency that trains Foley artists.
No, this is a long time ago.
But there was an agency that actually trained Foley artists.
Yes, yes.
Huh, that's interesting. I don't think there's any place else that does that.
And this was, I guess, quite unique then. As I understand it, the two women who ran the agency were very highly successful and well-respected Foley artists at the time. And they were getting so much work that they thought that they might be able to train some people so that they could work with the trainees.
And who were these women?
Pauline Griffiths and Jenny Lee Wright.
Aha.
So when I first started in the late 90s, we always used to work in pairs. Nowadays, we mostly work on our own, unless you're on a big feature. So that meant that as experienced Foley artists, they could take somebody under their wing and sort of have a kind of main artist and a junior working on some of the film projects. So it was learning on the job, essentially.
And what do you think made them select you?
Oh, I don't know. Well, they were looking for dancers, and I had a dance background. Their theory is that dancers have an ability to follow a choreographer, to remember rhythm and steps, which is kind of logical, I suppose, really.
I would agree with that. I started out in dance, and I think it helped me a lot.
And there's that physical you get into somebody's physicality when you're doing footsteps. So I did a little audition in this lady's front room and tried to walk in time with somebody on the TV screen. And yes, I was just very lucky. She took me in and a couple of other people. It was a very small little agency. I think at the very most, there were maybe three of us as trainees. So I mean, it was teeny tiny, but really a wonderful training ground for us.
And then you progressed into working on various smaller films or television shows or larger films, or how long did you train before you were trusted to work on your own or, advance?
Actually, to be perfectly honest, the first projects I worked on were big films because that's the sort of work that they were getting.
Mhm.
And although my very first day was a half day on a program called Soldier Soldier, so that was a TV show.
Mhm.
But yes, I was working on films, films where Pauline, for example, would know the sound editor, so she would know that it was okay to bring in somebody, a novice, into the studio.
What was
But
your
yes,
first
and then
day like? What was your very first
oh,
day like? I remember my first day still.
yeah, it doesn't go away, does it? That fear, that utter terror, walking into this massive studio
And
and
really not
just
understanding what it is that we're about to walk into.
no, no, exactly. And somebody saying to me, right, you're going to follow that character. They're jumping out of an aeroplane. Go. I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I
And all
just
of a sudden
hoped
you're
that my
thinking,
feet would
why
follow.
why am I
Yes.
here? Yes.
Yes. I mean, actually, why am I here is quite a good, a repetitive, a repeated question. Um, it is a funny old job, isn't it, Foley? But I feel very, very fortunate to have um, been taken on like that, and my career has taken me in all sorts of different directions, and yeah, I remain hugely grateful to them for taking me on.
Mhm. So you have massive credit list, um, and that's very reassuring because that tells everybody that you were trusted, that you grew, that you became very competent and artistic and creative in what you were doing. But then you stayed involved with theater, which I relate to because so did I. And
Hmm.
I continued to do my nightclub singing and my cabaret work and my songwriting, and you kept all of your crafts going. So you stayed involved with theater. So I'd like to know how you kept it, how you incorporated Foley into theater and then getting involved with Foley in opera.
Mm. So I used to choreograph quite a lot, and I actually had my own little dance company for a few years. Um, and for me, the Foley seemed like that was my day job. And then the dancing and theatre work was my passion. That was my creative outlook. And it was only a few years later that I started to realize how creative Foley was as well. It was just a psychological shift that needed to happen, I
Mm.
suppose. Um, then I was yes, and then I got involved with a theatre company and I started performing with them in plays, more straight plays rather than shows, dance pieces. And I started to direct. And then somebody passed on my name because they knew that I was involved with the theatre. And a theatre director who's a very prominent theatre director here, Katie Mitchell, was looking for a Foley artist to work on a research and development for a project. And again, luckily, I was the person that they suggested. And I went and did this project. And then a few months later, I had another email saying that the project had funding and we'd be going to Cologne to perform. So that was my first live Foley project. That was in 2012, and it involved a group of actors. It was multimedia, so there was film, there were projections, actors reading from a script into microphones and performing small bits of Foley, which I sort of directed them on, and me in the center of the stage walking along as the main protagonist of this tale, Sebald, a writer, in fact. So yes, that was my first experience, and it was just wonderful for me because, you know, I am at heart an actress. That famous actress keeps poking out somewhere.
Well, I
And
understand.
yeah, and then just to be involving Foley and theatre, it was just like this perfect blend, and I could never have predicted it.
Mhm.
It was yeah, it's been amazing.
But how does this transition into opera?
Well,
Because that is, I mean, I love going to the opera. And I've done Foley for theater. And
mhm,
as I briefly discussed with you before we came on to this, I do Foley for theater, and I've done the radio show. I've done it for NPR, or it was in Indiana, and I've done it in Los Angeles here. Foley for radio
mhm,
drama, where I'm doing sounds, knowing how they're going to be heard on the radio. And so taking the cinematic approach from doing a lot of film, I make it sound a particular way where I know it's going to play on the radio because I'm very auditory, starting out as a
mhm,
musician. And I think
yeah.
about that. And then I come up with some slightly hyperbolic sounds that I know will play on the radio. But then sometimes they want to incorporate my physical humor, because I can be very funny, into the show for the live audience. And
Mhm,
so I get to do that. And I did a lot of that when I was an endowed chair at Ball State University for the Christmas show, because it would be a live audience where I would be funny and incorporated physically, but then on air. And then
mm,
I've done it for some shows in the Los Angeles area here, and then a play that went to New York in a musical where they incorporated me. It was a character who was the radio sound person, but I was incorporated as a character because it was backstage, the radio people, and I was this funny person. But you've done something different. You've incorporated it into what I would call high art by taking it into opera. Now, I
mhm.
go to the opera and I love the opera. And I watched this clip on YouTube about you doing Marriage of Figaro, or not, no, Magic Flute,
Magic Flute.
excuse me,
These are the
Magic
flute.
Flute, which
Yes,
I love
the other one.
because I love Mozart.
Yeah.
And I heard you talking about it in this clip. So tell me how that transition occurred, because I find that in my own way rather magical.
The director of the piece, Simon McBurney, who I mentioned earlier, had the concept when they first made the piece that he wanted live Foley and live video. And
Hmm.
so actually, in fact, I was nearly brought on when they first made the piece in 2012, but they had found somebody else. And then the next time it was produced in 2013, they somebody saw me do another show, and that was my sort of audition, my unofficial audition. The thing with the Magic Flute is that it's not an opera per se, as it's not sung through from beginning to end. It's a singspiel. So there are scenes of dialogue in between the arias.
Huh.
So what the sound designer, Gareth Fry, what he and Simon designed was a way of linking the arias without the sound dipping. So the singers have this incredible power to their singing, and the orchestra, of course, it's creating a lot of volume. But if you then only have them speaking on stage, they're not going to speak with that same amount of volume. So there's a whole soundscape created by Gareth, which underscores the dialogue. And within that, I add either atmospheric sounds. I have a thunder sheet that I do thunder and sort of weird noises with. And then I also interact with some of the characters. So I have, especially with Papageno, who's the sort of comedy character
Yes.
in the show. And there are times when he's supposed to be really quiet to pass a test. And as the Foley artist, I make him very loud. So big, heavy footsteps as he's trying to be quiet across the stage and things like that. And then there's another scene when he's left alone and he finds a crate of wine bottles, and he starts to realize that they have musical tones, and it's actually, he starts playing them, and it's actually me playing the tune. So we have these sort of there are moments when I'm very respectful of the opera and I stand very, very still. It's quite, I have to get into a Zen mode, and just try and be as still as possible, always watching what's going on stage, which is not a chore, let me tell you, because the singing is just sublime.
Yes.
And then there are times when I become a character and I'm the Foley artist in the corner and doing fun things. So it's great. I have quite a range, I would say, of performance with that show.
Hmm.
There's a scene with Papageno where he's trying to be really quiet and I don't let him be quiet. So I join in when he's trying to walk across the stage silently. I make the sound of his footsteps. This is one of my favourite props that I made. Again, everything is very homemade and that's what I love about it. It's a very gentle sound, but it's the sound of rain in the trees, and it looks a bit like rain as well, and because it's hanging down from an umbrella, I think that gives a really nice effect. I try and put as much sound in as possible, so over the several years that I've been in this show, I've really built up the Foley side of things. This particular opera has a lot of scenes of dialogue in between the arias, and so we have so many opportunities to add sound to the show. It is a fun job. It's great. I mean, I'm making lots of loud noises on stage. I mean, what's not to love?
How often do you end up doing Foley for live performance?
Oh, it's difficult to say, really. The Magic Flute has been a regular production for me since 2013. We've been to Aix-en-Provence, Amsterdam, the Met last year, and Basel, Bergen, and we're going to Valencia in a couple of weeks' time. So over the decade, I've been to quite a few places and done it quite a few times, which has been brilliant because I've been able to extend and evolve my role and add more props. There's lots of props in this show. But I did a production of Cabaret in Copenhagen, which is one of my favorite experiences, where the concept was that the dances and the songs were hugely colorful, big set pieces, lots of costumes, bright and colorful pieces. And but the scenes were without props, without any furniture except what they could pull up from the stage as blocks. And so the lighting would delineate the areas of the stage, and I would provide the sound, for example, a light switch, curtains opening, a record being put on, the cocktails that Sally Bowles makes. So they would mime everything, and I made the sound for them live on stage. And
Wow, what an
that was a
innovative way
challenge.
of doing the show.
Oh, it was beautiful. It was really an incredible show,
Why do you
actually.
suppose the director made that choice?
Do you know, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think I ever got a chance to ask him. But it was really flipping things around because
So the
the
first
Kit Kat
question that
Club.
comes to my
Sorry.
mind is, because now you have a sync issue,
Mm,
because I've had to think about, I've had to do sound impacts with miming with actors in theater.
Mhm.
So now you have to coordinate with the actors
Mhm.
who are doing the action with you doing the sound, which means
Yeah.
in rehearsal, you have to rehearse. They have to be aware of you and you have to be aware of them, but they can't break the fourth wall. And
Yeah.
you have to watch what they're doing. And so there's this marriage of awareness of each other, of paying attention to what they're doing. And they may not always do it exactly the same. And you have to be very mindful, but they have to be aware that you are syncing up sound with them.
Yes. Now, the added complication to this production is that they had two casts. So they had the two leads, and yeah, and so four of the leads were double cast. So I had to learn two different sets of movements, and one of the guys was much faster. He didn't really understand the mime elements so much, so I had to really concentrate on him. And then sometimes they would put the glass down and I'd be like, no, the table needs to be at your waist height, and so it would be sort of all over the place. So it was complicated. And when we got into the theatre, there was not much time for me to practice my bits, because obviously they needed to practice the set pieces, the dances, they had to set the
Yeah.
lighting. So it was a bit sort of fly by the seat of my pants kind of thing.
How many performances did you do?
It was a 6-week run, 7 shows a week.
So do you think the actors appreciated your efforts? And I always wonder, I mean, sometimes there are some actors who really, when I work in theater, really do appreciate
Mm.
what it is I have to do for them. And then sometimes there are actors who just are oblivious. And what I always do is, and then sometimes they think of me as just a crew member,
Mm.
and they don't even understand that I'm like an equity actor with them, and that I consider myself part of the cast.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this odd piece where I'm very appreciative of the crew, because backstage crew always get the short shrift of appreciation, I think. So I'm really generous with the backstage crew. But do you think that actors in general that you work with are aware of your contribution or appreciative, or do you think that they're not paying much attention?
I think that's project dependent and actor dependent. Sometimes it can be a slow realization, and then when they finally get it, they're like, okay, this is great. Sometimes I've been a Foley consultant and I've taught people how to create live Foley. And there was one particular production where the actress I was working with didn't really like doing it. She
Mm.
didn't really see why she had to do the live Foley. She didn't really get it. And then we had the opening night, and the Foley went down so well that she just came up to me afterwards, gave me a big hug, and she just said, "Oh, you have made my role for me," and then that was the payoff. And it was, it's a shame that she didn't realize leading up to it, but I could see why she didn't realize. But she absolutely understood after she received the audience warmth and applause. Yeah, that was
So
quite
when you
nice.
say you can see why she didn't realize, why do you think that was?
Because for her, she there's a lot of stress on performers when they're on stage, obviously. And I think being given different props and not really knowing how to use them
Yeah.
it was just another layer of complication.
Well, there's a learning curve.
Mm.
I think so there are two things I would add to this. The first thing is, I think people don't realize how Foley is not easy to do.
Hmm.
They think
Yes.
because they work with objects all the time in life, that it's really easy to A, do it in sync, B, make the sound exactly right, C, put the nuance and the art and the character in. No,
Mhm.
there's a lot to it. But the second thing is that you have to make the art more important than yourself because you're serving something else. And you might be invisible and not important. And I think that's hard. The second thing another thing that comes to my mind is having been a professor who's taught sound for years and taught Foley classes, ADR classes, and then had assistants that have worked with me when I've done theater, Foley, or trained Foley artists in film and television, and had to teach it a lot. There is that learning curve that they go through where they get very frustrated.
Mhm.
And it takes a while before they feel relaxed in their own bodies. And beginners always seem to make the same kinds of errors when they're first learning it. And they get frustrated with themselves and they judge themselves harshly and they get impatient and they don't understand that it takes a while to get it into your body or into your hands and into the muscle memory.
Mhm.
But as having been someone who's been a professor teaching it, they get really excited when they actually get to learn it, when they really want to.
Mhm.
And the excitement that they get, like when I had students work with me and they wanted to, when I had an assistant work with me, say at Ball State, learning and being an assistant for the radio show, and they wanted to, the excitement that they would get in that they would get a chance to actually execute learning it would be very fulfilling. So sometimes it's whether or not they actually want to learn it. I a couple of years ago during the pandemic was doing a training somebody to do it for a college performance of Little Shop Around the Corner. And I had to train the college student how to do it during the pandemic where everybody had to wear masks and the actors had to speak through masks for a live production where they were pretending it was a radio show.
Goodness
It
me.
was wild.
Yeah.
And I was working with a director here, Luke Yankee. And so he was directing it, and the actors were acting through masks as if it were a radio play, but it was a live performance. And so it was a conceit. And she was stage left with a Foley prop table. And I was showing her how to do the physical comedy for the time that they wanted the physical comedy and how to do all of the stuff and do sync for their miming. And it was, very fast learning curve. She did a great job, great job, but she really wanted to learn it. And
Mhm.
she was very excited. And it was wonderful to work with somebody who was really excited to learn it.
Mm. Yeah.
And she learned fast. She learned fast. But there's a learning curve to it that I think they don't always understand.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you can demonstrate something and they think, oh yeah, I can do that. And then they realize that it's harder. Um, and and it's also it's something I remember reading this in your book actually a long time ago, that you can teach sync, but you can't teach feel.
Yeah.
And I hold on to that. I think that's absolutely perfect because there is something that we as Foley artists, we've been doing it a number of years, and there is this embodiment of the person that you might be doing footsteps for, but also this, I can watch my hands manipulate a prop, and I haven't told them to do that, but they do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. I don't know how. It's an alchemy of some kind.
It is. And I think I also think that depending on what somebody was doing before they started doing Foley, they take whatever that was before and it informs their approach to it. For
Yes.
example, you and I started in theater. I also was a singer
Hmm.
and then became a songwriter and trained in music. And so I approach things very musically. I approach things as an actor, and then you and I studied dance. Um, and so we're kinesthetic. I'm very auditory. And then there's the actor in us.
Hmm.
And then you directed. Now, I only directed a little bit. I am not a strong director. You're probably a much stronger director. but I know how to direct an actor. I know how to evoke an acting performance, but I'm not very good at staging. I would say I'm rather weak at it because I'm not very visual, which is humors people. But the joke I make on myself to just describe how unvisual I am is I have to park my car in exactly the same place every time I go somewhere, or I will forget where I parked it. It is
That's
so true.
classic.
It's a joke I tell on myself, but it's pathetically true. I'm kinesthetic. I have to go exactly the same place every single time, or I will forget how I got there. So it's sad, but true. Um, so I'm not terribly visual. I have to do something in exactly the same way because I'm kinesthetic and I'm auditory. Those are the strengths I bring to Foley. But
Yes.
and you know, I'm trained in theater, and I was very good at voices in Hollywood. I was a voice actor, very good at mimicry of voices, and a singer. So I'm very strong that way. But visual, so I wouldn't be good at staging in acting, in theater, but I'm very good at evoking performance. Um, but you need to do both if you're going to be a good director. So I wouldn't be a very strong stage director, but I'm very good at evoking authenticity from acting. Well, that's only half the job. So never mind. But so the fact that I've written a play about Foley, a musical about Foley, I'm going to need a different director. But uh, these things help us inform how we approach Foley. And I think the fact that they had so many dancers in Hollywood start out in Foley, or editors, they had editors here, sound editors audition to the elevated task of being the Foley artist in the early days, you know, like in the 50s. They had them elevate to be Foley artists once they knew how to edit. So they
Oh, that's
understood
interesting.
what
Yeah.
editing sound would be like. So that informed a different way of approaching Foley. It changes the way you approach it. So that leads me to my next question for you. How do you think, having worked in film and television for as long as you did, how do you think that informed the way that you approached your first job, your first positions working in theater Foley?
Well, interestingly, I think it's because I can visualize things. So it's very hard to create live Foley if you don't have a film in front of you. Radio Foley is a whole different skill set. And I have done some Foley for radio. I haven't done live radio. But for me, I need to picture what it is that I'm doing, what it is that I'm creating the sounds of. So if I'm teaching somebody to do Foley and I say, well, can you just walk on the spot? Imagine somebody walking. They can't do that because they've never had to do it to film, if that makes sense. So
That
it's really
does.
hard to sort of do it in isolation, I would say. And I think the work that I've done in film and television has absolutely informed what I do on stage, because I can picture it filmically. I can picture whatever it is that I'm doing filmically if I need to. I don't always need to for the things that I'm doing. But I think it also helps when I'm doing something, for example, in the Magic Flute that we spoke about. Often I'm doing something in sync with the performer. And that, again, comes from my background in the film and television Foley. And I think it's really hard to do that if you're not used to that process.
When you've worked in film, especially if you've worked in big films that are big sound films, it helps you recreate a more cinematic sound approach than if you've just
Yes.
done radio Foley, which is more condensed. I
Mm-hmm.
know that for me, I think in terms of layers,
Yes.
like you do for
Yes.
film. Working on the Magic Flute, does that change the way you approach your theater Foley? Does it go backwards?
No, I don't think so. because it is theatrical. I tell you what has changed though, and I've noticed this over the last few months, my ear has changed. So, and I think that's because with opera, nothing is amplified apart from me and the dialogue, because they're all wearing radio mics, but the singing isn't. And in the rehearsal room, you're hearing people sing with a piano accompaniment or something. And when I've been to see, when we were rehearsing in New York last year, we went to see a musical, and at first I was absolutely horrified by the noise, whereas normally I go and see a musical and I'm like, yeah, as loud as you like. And same with rock concerts, gigs and things that I've been to. I have found that I'm becoming more sensitive
Mhm.
to noise and sound, and I find that that's quite an interesting development, which I wasn't expecting. But I think it is because of of all the work in the opera, on this opera.
Is there anything else that you would add that might be of interest to what you do in theater sound that we haven't talked about that you think might be of interest to the audience? Because this is kind of a still burgeoning approach that a lot of people, it's new. It's a lot of people still aren't doing a lot of theater Foley yet. We have some in Chicago. We have several people in Chicago doing it. And I've done it here in Los Angeles, but it's still a relatively new thing. Is there anything else you would add?
Only just to go back to something you said about layering sounds, and in of course in film and TV Foley, you're constantly layering, and you're also, you have multiple takes and multiple chances to get the right sound. But in theatre Foley, you have to be quite succinct with what you're doing. And you touched on this with the radio Foley. You need to sort of find something that encapsulates the sound that the impression of the sound that you're trying to make. So, for example, in radio plays, you might get a teacup with the stirring of sugar with a little teaspoon, and a little tap, tap, tap on the cup. That's kind of all you need. You don't need all the pouring. You don't need the accuracy of making sure you've got 10 cups or however many you need. You just need to distill to the sounds that will give all that information. And I think with theatre Foley, there's a similar there's a similar process, because you want to try and give enough information, or as much information as possible, but in the most economical way. And of course, that's a practical thing as well, because you've only got two hands and you're working live.
Right.
With cabaret, I was opening a door with one hand and switching a light with another, and I had to have everything, all my props laid out in a particular way, because I needed to know exactly where everything was at any given moment. But you can only produce one or maybe two sounds at once because of your two hands. So yes, I think that would be the only thing that I would impart about my experience with theatre Foley, and also that it is utterly terrifying. I mean, it's fabulous, it's fantastic, but oh my God, the fear, the
Yeah.
adrenaline, and it's exhausting because of that. The adrenaline is exhausting, and I think that that's possibly something that a lot of people wouldn't realize.
I think that's true. I've
Mhm.
experienced that too. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
This is very wonderful discussion, and I thank you so much for being with me and all of us. And this
Thank
has been a
you.
delight.
Yes, it really has. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.